Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to show you how to track 3D ghosts into your footage. This is pretty fun to do. We're going to talk about some cloth dynamics. We're going to talk about compositing it using After Effects, as well as customizing using After Effects. If you guys are new to 3D, don't be too intimidated. It's actually very easy and you can make a lot of really awesome stuff. I've been messing around with this software. Specifically, we're going to be using Marvelous Designer to create the cloth. You're also going to need a 3D software of your choice. I'm using Cinema 4D, but again, a lot of the information which I'm saying is very interchangeable. So whatever 3D software you are comfortable with, you should be able to pull this off relatively easily. Let's go ahead and bring this into After Effects so we can track it. So right click it, replace with After Effects composition. So once you have your footage within After Effects, right click and trim comp to work area if you need to trim any of this. But if you're ready to start tracking this, all you need to do is right click, track and stabilize, and track the camera. All right, so our 3D camera is solved. Again, you want to make sure that your footage isn't too blurry. You want to make sure your footage is well lit, and you want to make sure that it's not too shaky. That is going to give you the best possible result when it comes to the track and making it look realistic. So if we scroll through here, this looks okay. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to find a nice place on the floor where I'd like to place my floating ghost. So somewhere like right here, I'm going to right click and I'm going to click create solid and camera. And now I can select that solid and let's just kind of expand it. We're not moving it at all. I'm just expanding it. And then if we press play, you should see a nice smooth track of that track solid exactly where we want to place our ghost. If it's shaking around, again, it's a footage issue. Now all you have to do is go up to File, Export, and export Maxon Cinema 4D exporter. So that is if you're using Cinema 4D. I like using this workflow because again, it's very interchangeable with After Effects. So I'm going to name this 3D Ghost and Footage Tutorial. Save it in a place where I can remember. So once you have your 3D software open, I'm going to File, Open, and I'm going to find that project file that we just saved from After Effects. So this one right here. Once you've opened that, you're going to see this little null object. Just expand that. You're going to see a 3D camera here and our track solid. So exactly what we pulled out of After Effects. And if we pop out of this little camera check, you'll see this is our camera selected. We can uncheck that. And now we can freely move around without worrying about messing anything up. And you can kind of get a sideways view of what the camera looked like of me going down the steps. So now all we really need to do is create our ghost and place it on this track solid. So let's go about creating our 3D ghost character. Let's file, save this for now, and you can just close it or minimize it. Hop into the link in the description to mixamo.com. The good thing about this, it's run by Adobe, so you can just sign in with your Adobe credentials to be able to access it. Another nice thing is if you just click on characters in the top left, you guys can just use this default one to be able to get this because the character in of itself doesn't matter as much. It's just going to affect the shaping. So if you go to page 3 of characters, you can grab this default X spot here. Now pop over to animations. You guys can make this do whatever you want. You can make it walk, you can make it float, you can make it run. Be creative with it. Look through the motion capture library that they have available here. I'm just going to search for float and we're going to use this little treading water animation. Also, make sure you guys pay attention to how many frames you really have. So for my shot, it's a little bit longer because we kind of walk towards it. So I want as many frames of this as possible. I'm going to go ahead and download this clip and you'll now have your FBX file. So now we can pop into Marvelous Designer. And if you don't have Marvelous Designer, you could probably substitute this with some sort of built-in cloth dynamics in your 3D software. But in my opinion, doing it with Marvelous Designer is pretty fun. So definitely look into getting this if possible. So once you're in Marvelous Designer here, we're going to go up to File, Import, FBX. We're going to bring in that FBX that we just saved from Mixamo. So floating right here, open it. And this is very important. Make sure you check animation here so that you can bring in the full animation. Click OK. And don't worry about this. Just click OK again. And it should be at the start of your animation. Now there is a way where you can have it go from T-pose into an animation if you do want to do full clothing for a character. But for this specifically, all we need to do, nothing fancy, just grab your rectangle tool. You can click S or you can go up to 2D pattern, create rectangle. Just draw a huge rectangle over top of your character, something like that. And this is essentially just going to be a giant sheet that falls over a character. So now you can hold down right click to rotate. If you click in your mouse wheel, you can kind of pan. So that's your basic controls for those of you that are new, but click on this giant bed sheet and just grab the red axis here and just turn it. You want to make sure that this is as straight as possible. So make sure the gray is facing the bottom and click this button here or space bar to start the simulation. And you're going to see the cloth fall over our character. This is why I think it's a fun process, because you can just click and you can drag to make any adjustments for this. If you have any issues where things are poking through like this, a quick little workaround, you can actually click on scene in the top right here, select whatever the name of the FBX is, bump that up a tiny bit. So I'll put it on maybe 7. You can also select the material here, and you have a bunch of options. You see particle distance. If you want, you can bump that up. You guys have your shrinkage left. You can mess around with that. And of course, if you want to actually change the dimensions, say you want to have the back of this be a little bit longer, we'll select this little selection edit pattern tool. You can click these dots and just make them longer like this. Make it all snap. And now if we simulate that, you'll see now we've made the bottom part longer. So that's the basics of it. I'm going to leave a link below to Travis Davids. He's an awesome YouTuber who's made a lot of beginner tutorials for Marvelous Designer, and he also has a giant fabric pack. We'll talk about finding other fabric textures on the internet, but if you just want like the whole beginner starter kit, I recommend you look into that. All right, so let's see what our animation is going to look like for this. So we can click over from this top right tab, simulation, over to animation, click OK here. And if we just click this little record button, you're going to see it act out the animation with the cloth dynamic on top. All right, guys, so once your animation has finished cooking here, we can go up to File, Export, and export it as an Alembic hdf5. And we're going to place this in the same area. So I'll name this floating, save it. And for our options here, you want to make sure same frame rate as from Mixamo, so 30 is fine. Make sure it's in centimeters, depending on what 3D software you're using. Cinema 4D is in centimeters. Export this cloth animation. Now you can close Marvelous Designer, pop back into Cinema 4D, and we're going to go to File, Merge Objects. We're going to bring in that Alembic file that we just saved. So mine was floating.abc for Alembic, and you can copy my options here. Click OK. And now, anytime you want to move around freely without messing anything up, always check off this camera. That's a very important rule because you don't want to mess up the keyframes for that motion. So now we can freely figure out where this cloth is. So we'll select it and just zoom into it. And it's super small for our scene. So I'm going to click on coordinates here. For these coordinates, I'm going to make this something like 40 for all of them. And then I'm going to just position this using the axis over top of our track solid here. If we now click back to our camera view here and I press play, you'll now see this is what our scene is essentially looking like. So it looks super cool. And whenever the keyframes run out, you'll see it'll just kind of freeze like that. If you want to see what this would look like over top of your original footage, again, make sure that this camera is checked into place. If it's checked out of place, it'll look off. So check it into place. File, you can even uncheck the track solid here. File, save, open up After Effects. And we're going to go ahead and just drag in the exact same Cinema 4D project file we were using before. So this one, this project file, which is here, we're going to drag that as a layer into our composition here. Now we can hide this track solid, select the 3D layer here. You can just change this to standard final so we don't see all these lines. And then if you press play, you can even get a RAM preview of what this is going to look like, just kind of a base view. And this is pretty good. Again, we're still going to need to add shadows and that kind of stuff. But if we scroll through here, you'll see in terms of sizing, it's pretty good. So this is how you can get a good judge of how big it is. Say, for example, I want to make it bigger, pop into Cinema 4D. I just make this, let's maybe make it scale like 42 for all of these. Make sure you're always checked into the camera before you file save. And then you can check and you'll see this live update. So there you go. So that's how you can make your adjustments through 3D, Cinema 4D, and After Effects. And now a word from our sponsor, Squarespace. So in a previous video, I mentioned that Squarespace offered the ability to have email marketing campaigns through the actual site. You're able to import a CSV of the mailing list. I hopped over to MailChimp where my newsletter is connected, and I just exported the CSV to load my audience into Squarespace. I was actually pretty surprised. They have some analytics to show how that audience grows over time. When it comes to designing, it was pretty easy. Just click on Create. You can choose Automation or Blast, and of course, there's a bunch of awesome templates to help you get the job done. So I'll definitely be using this in the future. If you guys are interested in Squarespace, you can use the code on the screen, MaxNovak, at checkout. Save 10% on your first domain name or website. Now let's go back into designing. Let's actually add some fabric texture onto this. I'm going to use Octane for this because that's just my preferred renderer. Again, you can use any third-party render plugin, or if you want, you can just make some standard material and do it the exact same way and just render with the physical renderer here. I'm going to fire up this Octane live viewer. What I'm going to do is go to create shader cinema 4D octane material, and I'm going to pop into that material, and I'm just going to make it glossy because I think glossy always looks a little better. Drop that onto our scene here, and let's start designing it. So I mentioned earlier that Travis Davids, he has this full, I think it's 45 plus fabrics which you can use. So I'm going to leave a link below to that. Again, if you guys look on anything, Quixel, Polygon, there's a bunch of sites where you can just look up and find free fabric textures. You can look up on the internet. It's a good, nice starter pack, and it gives you a lot of useful stuff. So say I want to have it like this lace, I can just start loading these textures into the different channels for this. So drag my base color into the diffuse, and what else do we have? I think a normal here. We have a normal, an opacity, and a roughness. So you can experiment with these different channels here. We'll pop into the opacity here, and this will add like these little, this will add the different holes like this, and our roughness. Let's pop out of the camera and just zoom in. So this is more fabric-y, as you can see. Let's maybe turn off the alpha channel here. And if we had more lighting, we can make that pop more. But that's just a great example of different variations for the fabric. Now, if you want to make your own custom variation for the fabric, so I literally went on the internet and I just looked up Louis Vuitton fabric. And I just tried to find some good images to use for this. And this is very experimental, but it's pretty cool what you can do. So let's right click and just save this image here. I'm going to create a new material. So create shader C4D octane material, and in the diffuse for this I'm just going to drop in our experimental fabric here. We'll drop in the little designer Gucci fabric, and you'll see here's what the texture is looking like. Let's drop that onto our ghost to actually kind of see a nice reference, and you'll see it doesn't look that fabric-y. It just kind of looks checkerboard like. So to give it that more fabric feel, I'm going to borrow some of the normal and roughness maps from that actual fabric pack, and that'll just give more life into it. So let's go for maybe one of these fabric knit ones. We'll bring in the normal and the roughness for this. So roughness, click in your texture, open. So that just gives a little bit more realism to this. Now we can also adjust how this texture is being projected onto here. Double click here, let's click on node editor, and this is what it's looking like. So we just have these images just dropped into diffuse. We're gonna delete this bitmap, and instead of that we're gonna drag in an image texture node here, and then we're gonna connect that image texture node to our diffuse. And now if we expand this here, you'll see with our image texture selected, we can click those three dots, or better yet, if you just have the folder open, just drag the texture back into where it says file, and it'll re-pop up. Now the reason we did this again as an image texture is now I can click projection, and we have this little projection control node. So I'll set this from mesh UV to box, and now I can have full control over how this texture is projected. So I'll lock the aspect ratio, and I'm just going to change the scale here. So this way you can have smaller little G's. I think that makes the fabric just look a little more realistic, or if you want to have them kind of blown out. There's one fabric texture that has these kind of ripped holes in it. I'm going to grab the opacity texture for those ripped holes and put it in here. So you can combine things together. So I'm going to click these three dots under opacity, and then let's see, it's under textile patterns 2. I think it's under dirty torn fabric. So this opacity image right here, we'll load that in, and now you're going to see if we zoom in here. Cool way to just mix and match things, create some different variations. All right guys, so once you've used those tips to design the ghost the way that you like it, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna add a shadow underneath this. And again, to see this checkered background, I just clicked settings and I just checked alpha channel, and make sure you uncheck keep environment. So I'm gonna go ahead and just show this track solid one more time. And I'm actually gonna Control C, Control V on it to duplicate it. And we'll just hide the original one for now. We're only going to use this one as a little shadow catcher. So I'll rename this to shadow catch, and I'm going to expand it a bit. And now I'm going to create shader C4D octane material, double click in there, and all you need to do for this is go to common and just check shadow catcher. Then you can drag that onto the plane. So easy as that, we now have our shadow. And if you want to get rid of that edge, you guys can just grab the plane and just try to extend. You guys can add any lighting. So if I want to add some highlight onto this, I'll go to objects, lights, octane area light. And if I just expand this a bit, Another thing you can do is go to Objects, HDRI Environment. And we talked about this a few times. So you can click on the HDRI sky tag here, click into the image texture. You go to hdrihaven.com or any other free one. You can just search for some free ones to download. So I went to indoors. So I think I went with this one right now, this restaurant where it has the similar kind of French style doors with the outdoors. So we can get that similar lighting. Just scroll down. I downloaded a 2K map, and then back in Cinema 4D, you just have to go and find that. You just have to find where you downloaded that, open it up, go and check your alpha channel off if you want to see the reflections. So we'll turn that off for now. And you can select this octane sky, you can rotate it, you can transform it if you want to get different reflections. It's really up to you guys. Once you've rotated it, you found what reflection you like. We're going to turn off our alpha channel again. In terms of your settings, I'm just going to use direct lighting because this will be a very fast render. I put it on 300 samples. Alpha channel has to be checked here. If you guys really want, you can put it on path tracing, and you can just make this a lot nicer. So if you want to have the nice settings, maybe a little fast, maybe a little slower, but I'll put it on 300 for there. Alpha channel, turn off keep environment. GI clamp, I like 6 for that. Caustic blur, I like 0.5. You can experiment with these. You probably don't need anything that high. So I'll probably just put that on 8 for both of them. Turn on adaptive sampling if it's really taxing, but again, this isn't anything crazy. Once you are ready to go, let's click on our Octane settings here. Make sure your renderer is set to whatever renderer you're using. So I'm using Octane, so I'm going to set it to Octane. Good thing about bringing in that link from After Effects is that this is already going to be set to the composition settings. So it's already 1920 by 1080. It's already set to all frames. In terms of our save here, make sure you always check alpha channel, so this will be transparent. And now let's find where we want to save this. So for file, I'll click the dots here. I'm just going to make a new folder here. I'll just name it Gucci Ghost. Double click into that folder. Just make a file name. I'll just say Ghost, save, and you can start to render. Easy as that. You guys will see how fast it is to really pull this off. Like I said, it's not anything crazy. All right, guys, so once your renders are finished back in After Effects, we're going to go to our project bin here. We're going to right click in this gray area and go to import multiple files. Navigate to the folder where you saved all your renders. So for me, it's this Gucci Ghost one. You'll see here's all the individual frames we rendered. All you need to do is select the very first one, make sure TIFF sequence is checked, import as footage, click import, click OK, and then click done. Now you can just drag that little TIFF sequence into your project and you now have it as a video clip. And if everything went correctly in terms of the tracking, everything should look smooth here. Now we're gonna add a few adjustments onto this to actually make it look a little bit more realistic. The first thing we're gonna wanna do, head over to your effects and presets here, look up a Gaussian blur effect and just drag that onto your TIFF sequence ghost footage here. If we zoom in, you'll see it's just kind of crystal clear without any blur. So I like to add just a tiny bit of blur. You don't want to lose the detail here, but you just kind of want to blend it a bit. So 1.4 I think is good for me. I'm going to search for a curves effect. I want to try and color match this to the surrounding as best as possible. Everything is very neutral. I'm just going to grab the bottom of these curves and just try and wash out those shadows. And then I'm going to adjust by just dropping down the blacks. So here's what that looks like. This is just very bold. This is just a little more washed out black like we have in the original, as you can see. You guys also can mess around with your highlights, the top of the curve. So I think that already is looking a little bit more realistic with the lighting in the scene. Now I also just added in a little HLS effect, color balance HLS, and I just dropped the saturation a tiny bit. Now, speaking of the shadows, if we look at the shadow underneath here, if you guys want, if it's a little bit too rough of a shadow, you can always just add a little mask onto it and blur it yourself. So if I just click, so if I grab my pen tool here and I just select all of the shadow region, it'll only isolate the shadows. If I click that layer and Control D to duplicate it, I can click M and then just put this shadow mask on subtract. So now we have a layer with just the ghost, no shadow, and we have a layer with just the shadow. So I'm going to bump up the feather for both of that. So click open your mask and just add a little bit of pixels to your feather here. And now I can just go and add something like a camera lens blur onto the shadow. And I can just gradually bump that up a tiny bit until I have it how I like it. I'm going to look up motion blur. And I'm going to add a pixel motion blur onto our ghost layer. Now you're going to see it's going to mess up your color grade. Just take that pixel motion blur and drag it to the very top above everything. That way you're getting the motion blur first and then you're applying all the color after the fact. And this actually adds a lot of realism into it. So anything that's quickly moving, like if this, for example, if we turn on the motion blur, you'll see what that looks like. Once you've got that ready, you can file save. And if you're working with a dynamic link, you can color grade within Adobe Premiere, which is exactly what I did. I literally just dropped a little conjuring LUT onto here, added a little bit of contrast. But either way, guys, that is it. I hope you did enjoy this tutorial. Let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments down below as well. If you have any trouble doing this or you need any help with this or any other project, check out our Discord link below. There's a lot of useful resources, a lot of helpful people, different channels where you guys can share your work, get help on something. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting, and I'll see you guys in the next one.